even get the kind of healing that being at this event is giving me. My name is Diondra Hall, and I am the organizer and director of the Swalk Victoria. I'd like to first begin by saying thank you for being here today, because whether you were a volunteer or whether you held a sign or whether you're just here to find out what the hell this thing is, you're still a really big part of what's happening. So I'd like to start off by talking about my personal story. And although it is one of many, I know that my story is significant, and it's why I'm standing in front of you here today. I'm going to talk about what happened to me today because sexual violence is something that I know that we need to have a lot more conversations about. I'd like to first begin by saying that I'm a survivor of sexual assault. I'd also like to preface my story by saying that I think sexual assault is not well understood, and I'm going to explain to you why. October 30th, 2012 will forever be remembered as one of the worst days of my life. After finishing a shift at a restaurant I was working at, I had made plans to meet up with a friend I had known for 2 years. We hadn't seen each other in a while, and touched base again, deciding that it was time to catch up. When he picked me up from work, he had another one of his friends in the car as well, and we decided that we would have a couple of drinks together and a night in. When we got to his friend's apartment, it wasn't long before the music was playing, the drinks were being poured, and we were laughing and talking. It had been a while since I drank last, and so the alcohol hit me sooner than expected. That fact, compounded by the fact that I didn't realize how much alcohol was being poured into my drink, contributed to my eventual intoxication. I decided that it was best to fall asleep where I was instead of trying to get home in the middle of the night. I remember feeling exhausted and starting to drift off on the couch. I woke up the next morning with no clothing on and his friend assaulting me. I wasn't able to process what was happening. I was confused, disoriented, and had the worst headache I have ever had to this day. When he realized that I had woken up, he got off of me. I don't know exactly what he was thinking. Maybe he got up because he realized I had woken up, or maybe he got up because he realized what he was doing was wrong. I had this awful feeling in the pit of my stomach. I felt disgusting. I just wanted to grab my clothes and cover myself up as much as I could and leave. My friend offered to drive me home and let me out of his car, and I showered and got ready to go to work. I remember trying to justify what had just happened. I remember trying to formulate a story in my head that made it so that it wasn't sexual assault. I couldn't, and that terrified me. I was asking myself so many questions in my head. What happened last night? I wasn't okay with what had happened. I was unconscious or in a state to consent. I remember finishing work that night and sending a message to my friend letting him know that I wasn't okay with what had happened the night before and that I wasn't awake and certainly not in a state to agree to have a sexual relationship with this person. He responded by saying, "From what I remember, you were awake." Hearing that left me feeling as though I wanted to vomit, and I started asking myself a series of questions that were about to lead into a toxic cycle of second-guessing myself. How could I have been so stupid? How could I have put myself in a situation like that? Why would I drink with someone that I didn't know that well? Yes, I was engaging in a process called victim blaming, which was shifting away the responsibility from the person who had just violated my body to myself. I should mention at this point that, like many of us, there are points in my life where the way I feel emotionally greatly outweighs the way I think logically. Logically, I knew that this wasn't my fault. Logically, I knew that I had every right to feel safe. After all, why would a friend of mine purposefully and intentionally put me in a dangerous situation like this? What I would realize later was that the person who was supposed to be my friend assaulted me as well. What many people will not realize is that my case is like many. An examination of the GSS survey done by Statistics Canada shows that in 89% of sexual assault cases, the victim knows their attacker. The majority of sexual assault happens indoors and in a space in which we feel comfortable. Oftentimes, sexual assault even happens in the victim's home. What most people won't realize is that the majority of sexual assault cases are what the criminal code defines as level 1 sexual assault, meaning any sexual activity that is non-consensual, leaving the victim with minor or no physical injuries. Many of us seem to be under the impression that most instances of sexual assault happen in dark alleyways by masked attackers, that these are people who just creep out in the middle of the night and commit these heinous crimes, and I'm here to tell you that that is not the case. If there is one message that I want you to walk away with today, it is that sexual assault happens to both men and women, regardless of what we wear, regardless of race, gender, and socioeconomic status. The night I was assaulted, I was wearing my work uniform. However, there have also been times in my life when I have been drunk and dressed provocatively and did not get sexually assaulted. The only reason I was assaulted that night was because I was in a room with 2 rapists and didn't know it. What many people don't realize is the number of studies that have been done to show a correlation between clothing and sexual assault. Gender violence studies show only a 4.4% correlation between the victim's clothing and the assault. And furthermore, studies have shown that in 60 to 70% of sexual assault cases, perpetrators don't even remember what the victim was wearing. What made my case unusual, unfortunately, was how I was treated after it happened. I confided in a friend, who I later found out used to work for the Vancouver Island Crisis Line. The first thing she said to me was, "It's not your fault." I don't know that she will ever know how much I needed to hear those 4 words in that moment. With the support I had of my peer group and the Victoria Women's Sexual Assault Center, I decided to report my rape to the police. The constable who is currently handling my case and pushing for it to go to Crown waited for me after finishing my medical exam, and from the moment he met me said, "This wasn't your fault." What you need to know when speaking to a survivor of sexual assault is that in those moments of vulnerability, in fear, and in that time of bravery when they first tell someone what happened to them, the first words that you hear will stick with you for the rest of your life. Unfortunately, my experience is not everyone's. Not every survivor will be told it's not their fault. In fact, many will be asked, "What were you wearing? How much were you drinking? Why did you invite him into your place? Well, you were doing this." Now seems the perfect time to talk about why the Slut Walk started and why it has become the fastest growing international movement against sexualized violence in decades. The Slut Walk started in response to a comment made by Police Constable Michael Sanguinetti, who, while giving a talk on crime prevention at York University's campus, stated, "I know I'm not supposed to say this, but women should avoid dressing like sluts in order not to be victimized." Unfortunately, this statement was not the first of its kind, and it will not be the last. Sexual violence continues to be one of the only crimes which holds its victims entirely accountable for the violence committed against them. There were many sentiments that this statement was charged with. The idea that there are certain people who are more deserving of rights and protections than others. The implication that if I do not dress, have sex, or act in a way that pleases you, that the invasion of my body is somehow justified. The reason why Slut Walk has become an international movement is because there are so many of us who are sick of seeing rape prevention tips, of being told that if we don't go out at night, if we dress a certain way, or if we live our sex lives a certain way, that we can somehow prevent ourselves from being raped. That we are to be accountable to prevent someone else from committing a crime against our bodies. Sexual violence started happening before the invention of miniskirts. Sexual violence happens to children, it happens to men, it happens to women who are dressed provocatively, and it happens to women who are covered from head to toe. The issues here are not our clothing or our perceived promiscuity. The issues here lie in the failure of our legal systems and institutions to hold perpetrators accountable. They lie in our social structures. They lie in the fact that we are part of a system in which rape and domestic violence are so often trivialized and even joked about. I hope that if there is one message you leave with today, it is that rape is never the fault of the victim. Regardless of the way you dress, regardless of your age, regardless of whether you have had sex with 1 or 100 people, regardless of whether you are a sex worker, regardless of whether you identify as gay, straight, transgendered, queer, gender fluid, male or female, regardless of the color of your skin, your religion, your cultural identity, regardless of what kind of sex you have or whether you don't have sex at all. It's about time that we started asking a different set of questions. It's about time we started asking the kinds of questions that can affect change in a real and positive way. Like, why is it that sexual violence is still a major problem in both Canada and around the world? Why is it that 97% of sexual assault cases, the accused are men? Why is it such a radical idea that I should have the autonomy and agency to make decisions about my body? Why is it that out of the 1 in 3 women and 1 in 7 men who will experience sexual violence in their lifetimes, that less than 10% of those cases will ever be reported to the police? Why is it that our legal system constantly fails to hold perpetrators accountable? Maybe when we start asking those questions, we can start getting some answers that allow us to address those issues and actually change things. And maybe then we can stop interrogating survivors of sexual assault and instead say, it's not your fault.